I think what we should all be doing is talking about our mental health as an aspiration.
But noticing all of that stuff is still going on around you, and that there are certain things that you can influence and certain things that you can't.
And actually there's something called the good enough parent, where essentially as long as that child is loved and you're doing your best, that is good enough.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives, a show from Priory where we talk with a panel of experts about key issues in mental health and addictions today. I'm Colin Quick and I'm the Chief Quality Officer for Priory, and today we're going to be talking about the issues related to children and young people's mental health. Joining on the panel to discuss this today are Priory's Therapy Director, Debbie Longsdale, Consultant Psychiatrist, Dr. Victoria Chamorro, and CEO of the charity Chasing the Stigma, Jake Mills. Hi everyone. So I think just to start off with, there was some really interesting work done last year by the charity Young Minds. And this was in summer last year, August 2023, and it suggested that the number of children in mental health crisis is at an absolute record high in England. And I just wanted to start with that as a discussion point about what are our collective experiences of that and our knowledge of it, and what does that mean to us and about our sort of society as a whole. So Jake, as the CEO of a charity that works in this area, I'd be really fascinated to really hear your perspective and your views on that to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming into this on two angles really. One as the Chief Executive of a national mental health charity, but the other is as a parent as well. What we are seeing at the charity, particularly through the Hub of Hope, which is a directory of mental health services that we've created, which is now the biggest of its kind in the country. And what we're able to do through the Hub of Hope is we're able to not only show people the help and support that's available, but we're able to gather information, data, insights about how people are using the Hub of Hope, where they're using it, what people are looking for. And whilst we don't capture any personal information about young people, what we are seeing is a huge influx of people looking for young person support. And in truth, it's really quite consistent across the country where people are looking for that help and support and what type of support people are looking for. It's probably something, there'll be many reasons for why we are in the situation that we are. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of questions to be asked about the waiting times, the thresholds that a lot of people are under, particularly for CAMHS services. But also there's a lot to be said about actually the awareness of mental health in young people as well in schools. Suddenly a lot more people are a lot more aware of mental health conditions, and so then are looking for help and support and not being able to do it. So awareness, whether it's for young people or everybody in between, has gone up, but the system, the services, the way that we're able to actually help people has not actually caught up. So we're in this really difficult situation now.
Okay, really fascinating, and really used to get that perspective on what you're experiencing. Debbie, from a clinical view, what are you seeing through your work?
So definitely increased demand, as you were saying as well, which is good for awareness, but also challenging from meeting the need. But lots of themes around COVID has had an impact, and how people have navigated that, developmental gaps some people are talking about. I guess that needs some research behind it, but that's definitely a theme. Family dynamics, social pressures, academic pressures, so many different moving parts, aren't there? And these amazing young people's brains are trying to figure out how they respond to all of these things. So a real mixture of challenges, but yeah, really high demand.
Okay. And Victoria, again, from your view, how does it feel for you on a day-to-day basis in practice?
Well, absolutely. My experience is more focused on perinatal, so babies with their mothers, and also from 18 up. And really, I think the demand is massively increasing. We're seeing a lot more children graduate to adult services, and a lot more demand for perinatal services, either through the pregnancy side of things, but also postnatally. So yeah, it definitely shows a massively increasing in demand. I also think in complexity as well. So it's not just more people are aware. I don't think more people are coming forward, which is great, but also I think more severe mental illness is also occurring.
So it's interesting. So there's a piece there about how we deal, support, manage, which is about how the system does. I guess that's that question about the why. And you know, there's got a lot of research, and you see some information, things knocking around that will say, 83% of young people are talking about that their mental health has become worse since the COVID pandemic. When you look at sort of 59-60% of again young people are for severe worry, and it's affecting their mental health and well-being around climate change. We've talked in previous episode perspectives around sort of global challenges and risks and how that impacts on people's mental health. So, Jake, I just want to come to you first of all. Are you seeing that through your work? Are you seeing those sorts of themes coming through as a sort of general air of worry and how that's impacting on people?
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually, during the whole lockdown period and then coming out of the lockdown period, we saw a difference in what people were looking for as well. So initially it was people looking for more depression type of support, and then coming out of lockdowns it was looking for anxiety type of support rather than depression, and alongside that as well was self-harm as something that people were looking for quite a lot as well, particularly in young person support. And as I said, I'm coming to this from two angles as a dad as well, and I think my son, when he started school just as lockdown was happening, he came out of school, it was stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. Before he actually got any routine, before he started getting used to being around people, he struggled massively with his anxiety, trying to cope with that. My daughter was just about to start, she wasn't even just about to start. My daughter, when lockdown came in, was only about 8 months old. She had to go into nursery when she hadn't even had anybody in her house. She's now 4 and thankfully she's thriving, but for the first couple of years when she was in nursery, she didn't say a single word to anybody. She was talking at home, but she didn't say a single word. They were talking to us about whether she needed speech therapy and all these other things. And that anxiety of actually going through that process where you've got such a scary world out there, everything's telling you it's a scary world, you're having to adjust. That's what we're seeing reflecting in what people are looking for through the Hub of Hope and everything that we're doing at Chasing the Stigma.
Yeah. And again, just to come to yourself, Victoria, as well, we talked then, and Jake talked about that impact of pandemic, we talked about impact of national. What are those other things that you see that just are causing that general anxiety and that worry? And also, where do you see that might be impacting on sort of more complex diagnoses as well?
Well, I think a lot of society is becoming more heightened in general. So I think we hear like 24-hour news cycles, we have social media, we also don't turn off from any of electronics. And I think if you're having a face-to-face interaction, there is a level of catharsis. You work through the emotions with somebody else, even if they're negative. Well, I think that if you're online, you don't have that discharge of that negativity and you hold it. So then coming back into everyday interactions, it's always very heightened. And I think you are not practicing the skills that you might otherwise do. And so you see a lot more anxiety and difficulties. Thinking of your 8-month-old daughter, in the tail end of the pandemic, I worked in a mother and baby unit, and because of COVID, all the mothers were wearing face masks. So when mothers took the face masks off, babies didn't really know what to do with that. They hadn't really seen a complete human face, or very limited, and it did affect their communication abilities. And I imagine their empathy, and it's interesting what those babies as a cohort are going to experience in later life.
So I think that's really interesting, and actually it kind of got me thinking as we went through that there's an area of I think developing complexity, or has become more complex over the last few years, and in particular there's become that greater awareness around neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, and there's an array of support mechanisms that sit there. I think most people working in the system would say not enough. But I wanted just to kind of get that view. I think just particularly, I'll come to Victoria in a moment, just to kind of talk about the differences in there, because I think there's sometimes confusion between what is a mental illness, what is neurodiversity, where do they meet, or actually it's okay to actually have experience both. And I want to get that understanding, and then also come to you guys to some thoughts around what you're seeing in clinical practice as well. So just over to yourself to start with, Victoria.
Everyone experiences anxiety, everyone experiences depression, everyone experiences the whole gamut of human experience. The world of mental health is not there to medicalise the human experience, that's not what it's for. But when that human experience becomes to such a severe extent that you're no longer able to function in the culture that you find yourself, and it's very important to remember we're culturally bound and considering different people's cultures, that's at the point where you probably need help and somebody to step in and help you. So it's not about whether you feel sadness, it's about whether that sadness is so overwhelming over an extended period of time that actually you need help getting somebody, you need someone else to help you step out of that, essentially. And that is the kind of golden rule really for all mental disorders and illnesses. When we talk about ADHD and ASD, it becomes a little bit more complicated, because what we're learning is it's really not an illness that you're going to get better from. It's not really like that. It's more you're wired differently from somebody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you think about the bell curve of any population, it probably is part of a population distribution. So it's normal, and evolutionary probably had a very strong reason that we're so successful as a species. But having said that, if that people are struggling to fit with society, then there are things that we can do to help them. So it's less of an illness and more practical. You know, how can society shouldn't maybe be how it is, but it is, and how can we help you navigate that?
Debbie, I just wanted to just explore, because Victoria talked a bit about just now about those some of those wider, broader symptoms that we might see or things that we need to look out for. But I guess it's that your experiences of working with a sort of slightly older, that sort of early teenage, going through that sort of age group. What's the sort of things that parents could be looking out for at that stage to think that actually maybe I need to help my child here?
Yeah, so I mean the list could be quite long, but essentially I would suggest that we're looking for changes in behaviour that don't feel very helpful. So that could be things like dressing very differently, where they wouldn't normally dress in a certain way, and you're thinking, okay, what's going on there? Maybe we're thinking about food restrictions. So again, 15-year-old girls particularly are quite susceptible to that. They're very stressed at school. They can start restricting food or getting very fussy or only eating certain foods, or textures can come in, or just having a different relationship with food. That's something to kind of keep an eye on and explore. I think that computer games are a big part of a teenage boy. I'm generalising, from my own experience, and that's normal, so that's fine. But I think when people get overly involved or withdrawn, or can't separate themselves, or they're on the headphones and you can't hear what's going on, you're noticing some changes of behaviour. I think when people withdraw a lot, that's a time to try and make yourself available and just check in with what's going on, and anything that you need help with, or maybe create an activity where we can go for a walk or do something different, and then see how they are without that kind of going on in front of them. For girls, yeah, I mentioned dressing before, makeup, being older than they might be at that age, that 12, 13, 14 age, is there something to worry about? Any things like grooming or anything else that we need to sort of be keeping an eye on that could be compromising? And then pressures at school. So I think if you have a child who's maybe been very into their sport, and then all of a sudden they don't want to do it anymore, that can be a sign to just explore something a little bit more. Or maybe they have been so competitive that perfectionism traits come in, and then you're noticing it's always a complicated one with perfectionism, because certain sports, that means they excel, or in certain things that can be an asset. But if it then compromises their enjoyment of life, or they can't do anything until everything's perfect, or everything's getting lined up, or they're touching the light switch 3 times before they sit down, and some kind of more habitual things are coming in, and that perfectionism feels like it's becoming unmanageable, again, that's something to keep an eye out for. The list is endless, but essentially it's change in behaviour or something that makes you feel like, what's going on here, I want to know more.
So incredibly complicated, so many different factors, lots of different parts of society needing to have an impact and have a role to play, because we all mould the children in our society together. One of the bits that will often come up, and we've talked about it in other episodes, is around the impact of social media, and the impact, positive or negative. And I think it's really important, and again we've talked about that before, about how there are two sides to that coin. So I just want to kind of I'm going to come to yourself first on this one, Jake. What are you seeing in terms of I guess the positives or negatives about social media with young people at the moment?
Yeah, and I think it is important that we are talking about both. I think sometimes we can look for a reason, almost a scapegoat for why all these problems are here, and I think social media often can become that. There is absolutely positives with social media to reduce the social isolation, to connect people, to learn, as I said, that idea of lived experience and understanding from each other. Suddenly you're connected to a world, and there are a lot of positives. However, with social media, it was a point that you mentioned before, is that it's constant. For so many people, it is constant, it is there. We know that social media is often used for bullying, for harmful material, for seeing things that most people when they were children would never ever see. So it's so freely accessible. Also, as I say, from a bullying point of view, when I was at school, bullying happened in those four walls of the school and the playground, and then when you went home, you went to your safe space. For a lot of young people, going home is no longer that safe space because it's there, it's constant. And it's something that we do often hear, particularly from parents as well, who are saying they've got no idea what their children often have access to, what the messages that they're receiving, and they really struggle to build a trust between themselves and that young person, to try to really understand what it is that they're seeing and hearing and being victim to. So it's a huge challenge, and unfortunately we're in a situation where there's not really that much being done to help. So we'd better need to train and educate young people on that online safety. But I think that's a very easy thing to say and a hard thing to do, and that's why there's got to be an added responsibility.
Of course. Any other views, Victoria or Debbie? Any other views around social media use?
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, pros and cons, as you say. When I was talking to some colleagues about our young people services, one of the concerns was that the social media negative impact is that the bullies can connect quite covertly, and also what it's allowing to happen is people who are not good for each other to connect, or some of these kind of TikTok kind of style things that happen that people follow because they want to belong or they want to be seen to be trendy. Sorry, I'm using old people's language. Then that can be really unhelpful behaviour and exposing people to things they didn't even know existed. And now, do I need to do this? Do I need to copy it? So again, it's that information overload. And I really worry. I listen to my own kids' phones going pop, 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 pop all the time. I don't think that can be good for anyone's brain. I can just about cope with my emails. I don't have any notifications. But I worry about that constant on the brain in terms of what that's doing in our brain activity. I like the adverts that are on TV about switching off the Wi-Fi. When you've got young kids, you can at least have some kind of regulation to stop the access to the platforms. Big debate around smartphones, isn't there, around when is the right time to allow your child to have a smartphone. I was talking again to a colleague, a psychiatrist, and she was saying that somebody had given a smartphone to a 5-year-old, which we can have our own opinions about. I think that's quite complex. I think it's just really difficult to navigate, especially with busy families, that want to know where their child is all the time. So I don't think anybody's got all the answers, but I think we have to keep talking about it, and a little by little, then it goes in the right direction.
And it is an interesting one, isn't it? As a parent of a teenager, I don't know what's out there. I don't know where those gaps are. I think I have a vague idea about stuff, but I wouldn't know through social media what genuinely could be harmful or couldn't be. And I think I'm relatively informed about stuff because of the job that I do. So it's very interesting. But I'm also really conscious, again, coming to yourself, Victoria, is that, I mean, you, again, as you talked about, you work with a group that probably almost matured through the proliferation of social media. And again, what's your experience with that group?
So what is really positive is people can come together from very disparate groups that wouldn't necessarily have contact with each other, that can find their tribe, and it's very validating. And so there's a big role in social media in doing that and letting voices come together and exploring topics. But there's a big but in that. As you were saying, you know, you're not able to work out who you're speaking to, whether that's a trusted resource, whether it's misinformation, whether that person has your best interests at heart. And so, you know, it's a neutral tool, but can be used for good or evil, essentially. When I see adults, they talk a lot about the traumas of childhood. And one of the big things is not feeling able to come forward to their parents. Either they suffered abuse or they didn't know how to broach it in public. And I think there are also things like disclosures being made online as a potential safe forum, and it's not, because it is essentially a public forum. And I think we're seeing a lot more of this kind of, I suppose, kind of parasocial world online, rather than with people that they're in the here and now with, that would be able to help. And these disclosures and comments are forever. And we then retrospectively look at people for their comments with an adult's eyes, and actually that we're not protecting children from that level. So it's not just trauma in the kind of strictest sense of it, it's also kind of unwise decisions that people are making online, because it is an adult space. So it's a very difficult thing to regulate, and I think one of the core features of every generation is the younger generation are always going to be more advanced than the older generation, and so more able to navigate it, not necessarily with an adult's brain.
Can I ask on that? Do you feel like Debbie's point is absolutely right, and I think that's kind of where most people do turn off the Wi-Fi and we try to, you know, take phones away and all that, but is that then playing into the hands of what you've just been talking about there, of not coming forward to a parent, not having that, because actually the parent is taking it away and not creating this trusting relationship where you can talk about what you have seen, or the things that maybe would young people be more likely then to turn to that social media, turn to that world that maybe is a bit more acceptance to them, whether it's right or wrong, what they're seeing.
So I think
the parents are the bad guys.
I think all young people, there is a certain stage in your life where you turn to your peers over your parents, and it's starting to develop your own individuality. So I think that is true of any generation. But I think what I see with my adults reflecting is that they wish they had more support in some way that is. Whether that's through probably pre-existing poor relationships with their parents. So I think most of my patients are down very severe end. So they wouldn't necessarily have a supportive relationship at home at all. It might be a lot of domestic abuse. So there's not a safe space. So they're looking elsewhere for it. And that space is also not safe. But it's got more subversive dangers than necessarily, you know, what we think about physical safety.
I have heard that phrase a few times actually, about young people who then moved into adulthood and they reflected back on the things that they were exposed to. And I've heard a few people say, but where was the adult? Where was the adult to protect me from what I didn't understand I was being exposed to? So I think that it's a really complex relationship, isn't it? But I think we as adults have got to take some kind of responsibility in terms of making decisions around what should that age group be exposed to, and if I have any control, I can use that control, so switching off Wi-Fi. I don't know that it's right to allow the child to always decide, because I just don't think they know what to do with the information, because they're just not developed or don't even know how to express it, maybe. It's really complicated.
Bit of a conversation that we started earlier on. I want to see if we build on it a little bit more. So how do, as a parent, do we have conversations with our children about mental health? How do we have those conversations that say, actually, this is what you need to think about. This is how we maintain good mental health. This is how we just even start that process, because by definition, your charity is chasing the stigma. There is a stigma still associated with mental health, and as someone that's worked in it for 30 years, I've seen that develop all the way through. And I just think it's really important about how we have those conversations. And we heard earlier on that, your hope is that that just goes, it becomes part of the norm about how we talk about things. But what advice could you give to a parent that needs to have that, or feels that they should have that conversation?
We wouldn't really have that same question about how do we talk to our children about physical health, because what we would do is just do that naturally. And I think we're very scared to do it. And whether that is in children or in adults, people that we know, we're scared because we go, what if we say the wrong thing? What if we make things worse? Well, we don't want to kickstart something. I think what we should all be doing is talking about our mental health as an aspiration, as something that we all have, something that we can all look after, something that we can all be aware of. If you think about when we talk about our physical health, and you think about children at the earliest stage when they can only just talk, and we're talking about the physical health and they say, I don't feel well, and we ask them, we encourage them gently, what type of not well? Is it your head? Is it your tummy? What can we do? Can we help you? We start at the earliest possible stage, and they then take that into their adult life. They take that into childhood. You've got children playing doctors and nurses as young as they can, saying to the mums and the dads and the granddads, oh, you're not well, I'll make you better. So we really normalise that conversation. And so I think we need to be doing the same thing with our mental health, so that it's a really normal conversation. We talk about it when it's well, because when we talk about it when it's well, it's so much easier to talk about it if it's not so well, and we normalise that at home. And I think one of the biggest things that we can, that I would say, if you are worried about a child in your life, is you can control the environment and how you have that conversation with them. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to. If I said to my son, you sit in that chair and I'll sit in this chair and we're going to talk about your feelings, he'll be like, absolutely no way. But actually, if we can do it while we're playing with Lego, or we can do it whilst we're out in the park or something like that, and normalise and make him comfortable, have the conversation where he's comfortable, and allow him, with open-ended questions, allow him to talk to me. It really doesn't have to be that scary, so we really have to normalise that conversation.
I would take it, though I'm biased because I'm a perinatal doctor, but I would take it even further back. So what mums do with their babies, so they understand their emotions and what's going on around the world, is you'll see mums often narrate life to them. So a baby starts crying, for example, and mum will go, oh, you must be hungry. Are you feeling hungry? Let's get you some food. I'm going to go take you to have some food. I'm heating up. So they kind of narrate their life about them and how to manage that. That also goes through to emotions, and you can start narrating your emotions. You look angry. You're being quite pickle. These are all very reasonable conversations to be having with a very young baby. You'd be amazed how much they pick up. And all the way through to kind of toddlerdom. When a child skins their knee and they're looking for mum for a bit of support, or dad for a bit of support, the hurt of skinning your knee is only the infinitesimal moment of it. It's actually about the fear of what's happened and about the difficult emotions that's raised, and then coming over to mum for how do I contain that, how do I manage those emotions, and then the parent figure is able to give it back, those emotions, difficult emotions, back in a way the child can tolerate. And I suppose just parents being aware that that's the role they're playing and verbalising it. So it can happen really, really young, and you'd be amazed at how much that the child does absorb, because they're little sponges.
And do you think as well with the child, because I was really conscious as Jake was talking just now, that's doing that is a very emotionally mature, very aware person talking about it and being able to do that. That's a skill in itself to be able to do it. But what you described there, does that help build the skill of the parent as well?
Yes, I think so. And it makes it something like, not, as you were saying, not a conversation broaching. It's something I've already I always have spoken to you about ever since you were born. It's a way of acknowledging emotions, validating the emotions, and then learning how to deal with emotions. And as the child grows up, you would put more names and words to it, but essentially you start the process little.
Brilliant. Okay. So I want to just move us forward now, because what we've talked about is that kind of the preventative piece, the understanding, the knowing, the bit about self-supporting. But sometimes that's not always going to be enough. Sometimes actually we need to move into a much more reactive and proactive response and treatment process that's there as well. And we don't want to over medicalise those things, but sometimes it's needed. But I just wanted to bring, just first off to yourself, Jake, is from your perspective and your views, what's out there in terms of the sort of charitable support, third sector support? What sort of things are out there that parents could think about coming to if they've kind of gone beyond their resources? What's there to start with?
So one thing that I would say to begin with is that generally, I appreciate I'm on a panel with experts, but generally we're not experts. Vast majority of people are not experts, and that is okay. You don't have to be an expert, but there's lots of information. So if you're starting to notice things, then you can go and get that information and support as a parent, as a carer as well. And there's lots of support out there for parents and carers. The reason we created the Hub of Hope, to bring support together in one place, was to show people and make it real accessible to different types of support that are actually on your doorstep. And the directory itself is over 14,000 services now. And I'm absolutely amazed daily how much is actually out there, and unbelievable types of support that you'd never ever think of. The non-clinical places where you can go, be around other people, use things that will engage children or adults as well in totally different ways that actually more often than not can be free, can be accessible to anyone, where you can just go and be around there. If you go and have a look on the Hub of Hope, look in your area, find the support that is available from different charities or other organisations, you'll find something, I guarantee, you never knew existed. And actually, that more often than not, that support network, that non-clinical side of things, might be the step that you needed to take before you then go on and try to get diagnosis, try to get that statutory support. So there's so many different types of support services that are available that, yeah, I'm sure you'd be amazed at what's out there.
But so affirming for your Hub of Hope, to hear so many people that want to be doing something, and that for that next generation of young people and how they're going to be supported is just phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that's why it does fill me with a lot of hope. You know, I created the charity and the Hub of Hope through my own lived experience. I never knew anything about mental health. I knew nothing about the help and support that was available. And I actually tried to take my own life just over 10 years ago. And I speak really openly about it. I'm really happy to talk about it. That's what I've always used. And I had a moment when I thought, one day I'm going to have to tell my kids what I do. You know, I've got 2 kids, and they know I work at Chasing the Stigma. They'll come into the offices, they'll do all of that. They don't actually know what I do. And I've built it up. And not long ago, my son, talking about having access to iPads and everything else, he said, "Dad, you're famous, you know." And I was like, oh God. And he got up like an article, and I was like, I thought, this is the moment. And I said, sat him down and said, "Do you know what this is?" And explained to him, said, you know, I felt like this way and that way. And he was just like, all right, okay. And he, how are you now? And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And he was like, so is that what you do now? Is you try to stop other people feeling that way? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, cool. And I was like, that there is why I do have that hope in that younger generation, that they accept it, they'll deal with it. You know, I'm not saying that that's the end of it for him now, and he'll probably have to process it in different ways as he does grow. But for me, it did just offer me so much hope that actually they are going to challenge that stigma and the prejudice and really normalise that conversation.
Thanks, Jake, that's brilliant. Obviously we talk that there's a time and place where actually some treatments need to be a little bit more complicated. There's some challenging needs for that young person. We need to really support them. But I just wanted to kind of come to Victoria, just to start with, the view, we don't just sit there and we don't just go, right, here's a load of pills, you small child, you crack on and do what you need to do. We don't just sit there and have some really sort of complex adult type therapy where we sit the young person down and we just talk at them about stuff. And I know that's not how our therapy works, but it kind of perceptions sometimes of how these things happen. What does, from your point of view, and I'll come to Gary to talk maybe a little bit more about the therapeutic side of it, but from your perspective, what does that look like for a young person? What sort of things that we would think about?
In terms of how child therapy works, I will allow Debbie to answer the ins and outs of that because it's not my area of expertise. But yes, absolutely, it's age appropriate. So it starts off with things like play therapy, and all the way up to really kind of more school-based counselling with people they're really familiar with, and opening the opportunity to have some of these conversations. I know they also have a lot of work with animals, so a lot of equine therapy and dog therapy and things that make it more attainable and approachable for children. What I did want to mention very briefly, I think parents really worry when they're approaching mental health services or social services that there's going to be an element of parent bashing. And I'm very aware that we've just been talking about how parents can better open up with their children and have these difficult conversations and support their mental health. I think what's really important to underline is we know there is no perfect way to raise a child. There's been studies into this, and what the evidence has shown is actually really reassuring. And actually there's something called the good enough parent, where essentially as long as that child is loved and you're doing your best, that is good enough. And actually being the perfect parent is to be an imperfect parent, because a child has to learn how to deal with the frustrations of dealing with other humans that are not perfect in every way. So actually I just wanted to mention that accessing charities, accessing mental health support will not make people think that you are not good enough as a parent. Really far from the truth. People want to help you support your child.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's go to you then, Debbie, because it's that discussion about what does therapy look like? Because we're talking about a really big age range here, from a younger child to a young adult with different levels of intellect and cognition and verbal ability all the way through there. How do we manage that?
Yeah, it's definitely age appropriate and development appropriate in terms of mixing those two things together. So I've worked with primary school children and then high school children and then older teens, and I consciously know that my style and my language and my interaction will be different. I'll have a different hat on depending on what was in front of me. Play therapy, as you mentioned before, is generally the place to start when people are very young, because language maybe doesn't allow them to kind of articulate whatever it is that's going on, and there's a lot of evidence around processing things through play can be really, really beneficial. So that's super helpful. And then I think you've got all your modalities that can be customized. So CBT predominantly for young people. I think that creativity for that kind of mid-age is really important. So using creative approaches, so using art or walking around. And then you've got people who I've worked with who want to learn and see things in a very black and white way, and actually, can you give me some information that I can take away and I can apply to my situation? So we then use the traditional kind of CBT, worksheets and things. So it very much depends on what you're working with and the complexity. I always try and think about the child systemically, because the child is having to navigate their environment without a choice to some degree, so they have to survive their environment. So even if they come and they say, I'm really falling out with my brother, who's older or younger, it doesn't really matter. If that was an adult talking about their brother, you would just talk about how to distance yourself or manage a relationship or don't see them as much. But this young person lives with this brother, so they're going to have to figure out a way so they have to survive their environment. And I think that's a slightly different environmentally challenging way that we have to acknowledge and help them learn to see what they can do and what they can't do. And then systemically, they've got their parents, they've got their friends, they've got their school. So actually what they're bringing into the room is so many more people that might not actually be there, but are there. And sometimes you might use chairs where you have empty chairs, and you might have a conversation with a particular person who's they're struggling to have a relationship with, and you might put a teddy there, or you might not put anything there, and we have a conversation with that chair around, you know, I'm going to support you to say what you want to say, you have a go. So there's all different sorts of really helpful, creative ways of supporting young people. And in the therapy world, every behaviour has got a reason, so it's all communication. So even if they are supposedly naughty or not doing things properly, whatever that might mean, for me it's getting behind what does that mean, what are you trying to communicate, what are you saying, and try and make sense of it.
Okay, so what we've done again is we went out to our viewers to ask them to send in any questions that they wanted to ask the panel today. So this came in from someone who used the username Enlightened Mind, and this came through Instagram for us. And they wanted us to talk about the managing a sense of hopelessness. So young people get anxious about a lot of things today, especially if it involves a threat to their future. How can we manage their sense of hopelessness and help them see a brighter world?
I think when we think about hopelessness, it's that you can't change the outcome. You know, it's that there is no action that you can take. And I think that's not true, essentially. So I think there are everyday acts of heroism that people can undergo, whether it's just being kind to your neighbour or the young person sitting next to you, or encouraging someone to get help if they need it. These are things that really do make a difference.
I think it's an easy thing to get consumed by because of the 24/7 nature of how we live. So it's choosing what you engage with. And the therapist in me would say, well, let's take a gratitude list, let's choice around what we connect with, take it back to basics. You know, what are you grateful for? What are you happy about? What are you looking forward to? And then you're having to almost rewire what you're focusing on. So again, it is a skill and it's a choice and it's a state of mind, but noticing all of that stuff is still going on around you, and that there are certain things that you can influence and certain things that you can't. So again, it's back to the what can I influence, what can I impact on, and focusing more on those, noticing all the other stuff that's going on that is really challenging. And I can't focus on that all the time because that's just overwhelming, and I can't do it.
Victoria, I'm going to start with you on this one because I think this falls quite neatly for you actually. So this one was sent in to us anonymously, but I've had my own struggles with mental health while parenting young children. Do you have any advice for managing my mental health while parenting?
Well, the first thing I would say is if you need support on a kind of more than kind of lifestyle factors, then reach out. The perinatal services in the country are excellent. Absolutely do reach out. It's difficult to say kind of in general terms of mental health, but mums do go through unique challenges, and it's partly losing control of your body, losing control of yourself as an individual, and managing the relationship with your baby and all the societal pressures. So I suppose it's keeping in mind that, as I said before, you're doing your best, and that is good enough as long as that child feels loved, which it sounds like if you're asking the question, that's a very good sign. And not being afraid to ask for help. Now that could be from services, that could be from your loved ones, that could be from wider friends network. And the other thing is to prioritise sleep, because I cannot overemphasise the importance of sleep and how everything feels very dark. And as soon as a mum gets enough sleep, which is easier said than done, then everything changes. So in that particular unique period, sleep is the thing to prioritise. Everyone says sleep when baby sleeps. Obviously that's not possible. But I think having some time where baby's looked after by somebody else, for example, and you get a couple of hours, can really make or break.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just going to bring yourself in there, Jake, because I'm really conscious our question, we didn't specify the gender of the person that was from. And I think it'd be really interesting to kind of get a dad's perspective on what sort of things do you think could be done as a dad just to kind of protect your own mental health during those tricky times?
Do you know, I would actually say one of the most anxious periods of my life was both times that my wife was pregnant, particularly near the end of that pregnancy. And like my phone would go and I'd see her number and I'd panic and I'd answer and she'd say, do you know where the remote is? And I'd be like, don't do that, just text. That's all right. But the heightened anxiety that I had during pregnancy, where that actually manifests into quite often like being physically unwell and panic attacks and stuff like that. I think I remember when my son was born, and it was a week after he was born because it was Christmas Day, and I remember coming down with him and just like probably really crying for the first time in a long time because everything just hit me. Like it takes an awful lot and it never really goes. I don't personally subscribe to the notion that it's okay to not be okay. I don't think it is okay to not be okay, but I think it's common and very, very normal to not be okay. And the reason why I make that point is because if you're not okay, you don't just have to accept that. You can acknowledge that it's common, that it's normal, that it's probably expected, whether it's from a father or from a mother's point of view, but that you can absolutely get that help and support, and you deserve that help and support to be as well as you can be. If you're not okay, we want you to try to get to being okay. And this is for me why the importance of having a conversation with young people about the mental health is not just about having a conversation with young people about the mental health, it's about having that conversation right throughout that family. You talk to a young person about their mental health, they can talk to their parents, their grandparents about their mental health. Actually, young people can play a big part in normalising that conversation right throughout the family. So yeah, I think it's very, very common, normal, but there's absolutely help and support, and you deserve that help and support.
Thank you so much for the panel for joining me today, and I really hope that the viewers today have got some real key takeaways from what is a really complicated and difficult and challenging area of mental health and well-being. Now, if you have enjoyed today's session, then please do like this because it helps us get our message out there as wide and as far as possible. And also, if you do want to get up-to-date messaging from us and the information about when we're likely to drop new episodes, then please do subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching today.